The shower kept dripping onto the tile, steady and stubborn, like someone had just stepped out but forgot to turn off the water. The mirror was fogged, blurry, barely reflecting anything. I was about to wipe it clean with the sleeve of my robe when I stopped. In the middle of the glass, traced by a finger, was a message. "Find me, if you dare." Simple. Childish. Or something much more complicated? I stood barefoot on the cold tile, hair damp, and that uneasy feeling I'd been ignoring for weeks tightened its grip. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a coincidence. I had cleaned the bathroom earlier. No one else had been in here. Except him. Which meant the message was for me. Or maybe from me? I didn't understand why I froze. This was our house. Safe. Familiar. But now it felt different. Like a structure I no longer understood. I wiped the mirror too quickly, too harshly, but the tension stayed. I couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching me from the other side of the wall. The hallway was quiet. His bedroom door stood slightly open, light on, but I heard no footsteps. Silence, especially the kind you only hear in homes, can be deafening. In the living room, a stack of boxes caught my eye. One of them, old, battered, was filled with photographs I hadn't seen in years. I opened it. My husband, United States, and the boy. Smiling, small, full of light. He's grown now, almost my height. No longer a child. His eyes have changed. That scares me. Not because I don't recognize him, but because I've started to realize he doesn't recognize me either. I've lost the map. Somewhere along the line, we stopped speaking the same language. There's no conflict between us. No warmth either. Just that in-between space. No one's reaching out, but neither of us is walking away. Sometimes I think I built that distance myself. After my husband died, I didn't allow myself to fall apart. I became efficient, quiet, in control, for everyone, even for myself. But lately, I feel like he's leading me into something. That message on the mirror wasn't random. It was an invitation, or a test. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold tea, waiting, hoping he'd come out, hoping we'd pass each other, exchange a glance, a nod. But he didn't. Like nothing had happened. No mirror, no message, no box of memories. And for the first time in months, I felt it. Something had shifted. Something we couldn't undo. I remembered teaching him logic puzzles when he was 10. We'd hide clues around the house. He always solved them faster than I expected. "You're too easy to read," he used to say. "You can't hide things properly." He wouldn't say that now. I'm not so easy to read anymore. Neither is he. I stood in the dark hallway, looking at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I didn't recognize my own expression. The tired eyes, the clenched jaw. We'd reached a turning point. Not today, not yesterday, but sometime back. We just hadn't admitted it yet. On the floor, near my bedroom door, was a folded piece of paper, our old homework stationery. On it, the same words from the mirror. Same pressure, same shape. Not an accident. I could still pretend. Say it was a coincidence, a cry for attention, a child acting out. But I'm not someone who lies to herself anymore. This isn't a game. It's someone nudging the line, or waiting for me to draw it. I crawled into bed, fully clothed. The blanket didn't warm me. I stared at the ceiling, trying to remember what this house used to feel like. Back when dinners were warm, laughter came easy, and everyone had a place. Now it feels like a map where every step is a risk. If I don't move carefully, I won't just lose control. I'll lose him. And maybe myself. I didn't go looking for the box. It found me. I was just tidying up his room, the way I used to when he was little. Back then, it was routine. Now it felt secretive. He'd long been doing everything on his own. But that day, I walked in as if testing the waters, to see if I was still allowed to be needed. The box was in the back corner of the closet, half covered with a blanket. I recognized it instantly. It was one of those we packed after the funeral. I hadn't gotten around to sorting it. Just put it away and forced myself to keep moving. But now it was here, in his room, which meant he had found it, opened it, without telling me. Inside were my late husband's old things, his watch, his letters, a faded bottle of his cologne, and a few photos. One showed him carrying his son on his shoulders while I stood to the side laughing. I used to dislike that photo. I felt like an outsider in it. Now it felt too intimate, too fragile. What was he looking for in these things? Answers? A piece of his father? Or something else? Something unsaid? He's a teenager. Pain is silent. Family is distance. But he was searching. That much was clear. Then I caught a scent. Faint. Lingering. My perfume. Embedded in the fabric of an old shirt. Or maybe it was my mind playing tricks. Smells are like that. They don't bring back memories, they bring back emotion. And I felt caught. Why had he taken the box? Why hadn't he put it back? That wasn't an accident. It felt deliberate. A signal, maybe. A kind of nonverbal confrontation. Or maybe a plea. For something neither of us knew how to name. I looked at the photo again. The three of us. Back then, I felt I belonged. Now, things are different. He doesn't call me Mom. I stopped asking. We chose formality because it's safer, because it doesn't require questions. I began placing everything back when I noticed a letter tucked at the bottom. Not mine. Not his. A note from my husband. One I had forgotten. It was short, faded. He'd written about his fear of losing connection with his son. About how hard it was to balance closeness and authority. He begged me not to build a wall. That was his phrase. I had forgotten those words. Or maybe buried them. But now they echoed louder than ever. I closed the box and left it where I found it. Walking out of the room, I realized something. Nothing in this house is where it used to be. Things have shifted. The silence is heavier. Even the air smells different. This isn't just about him. It's about us. About how we've both landed in a space where neither of us knows how to be with the other. I'm the woman who is supposed to be close. He's the boy of the man I once loved more than anything, and now fear to remember. I'm still standing on my side of the hallway, but I can feel his gaze. Not hostile, just watchful. Maybe even hopeful. And I don't know what to do with that. I heard a dull thud the moment the lights went out. The bulb flickered and vanished. The power cut off sharply, as if someone had pulled the plug on reality. Only darkness remained. I grabbed a candle from the kitchen drawer and lit it. The flame trembled in the draft, just like I did, from a tension that hadn't let go since morning. He appeared in the doorway, barefoot, in a t-shirt. His eyes reflected the light. He didn't speak, just looked, and stayed. I didn't know what to say. Everything felt too thin. We were both standing on glass, one wrong step, and it would crack. I set the candle down on the table and stepped back, trying not to show what I felt. He sat across from me, too close. The air between us thickened. I could smell the rain. Somewhere outside, a storm lashed the windows, but inside another storm was brewing. We sat in silence. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence where every breath is loud, every thought sharper than it should be. He looked up. And in that moment, I knew. It had already happened. Before any action. Before any word. Something had crossed a line. He leaned in, slowly, carefully, like giving me a chance to move. But I didn't. Not right away. Not fast enough. His lips brushed mine, barely, like a breeze. But I felt everything. The fear, the guilt, the confusion, and something else. Something without a name. I pulled away abruptly, stood up like I'd been burned. He stayed seated, still, quiet. I couldn't find where to place myself. I started moving dishes around, closing drawers, busying my hands just to quiet my mind. I wasn't angry at him. I was angry at myself. For letting it happen. For not seeing how far our silence had taken us. The kiss wasn't an accident. It was a boiling point. And if I'm honest, it wasn't just him. I didn't stop it right away. I froze. I let it happen. It wasn't a romantic moment. It was a signal that we had both lost the map. I'm an adult. He's a teenager. There should be clarity between us. Lines, no confusion. But life isn't a moral instruction manual. Sometimes the boundaries fade too quietly, and you only realize you've crossed them when it's already dark. I locked my bedroom door that night. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I was afraid of myself, of my exhaustion, of my loneliness. Because in that silence, for the first time in a long time, I felt human, not a role, not a function, just someone struggling, silently hoping someone might notice. But the cost is too high. Even a single kiss is a wound that sorry can't fix. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling and wondered, what now? Can we rewind this? And the scariest part, do I even want to? We went up to the attic together, though I originally planned to do it alone. Just a box with winter clothes. I hate asking for help, especially from him. But the box turned out heavier than I expected. He offered immediately, almost too quickly. The stairs creaked beneath us, every sound cutting through the silence like glass. The air in the attic was dry and dusty, thick with the smell of old books and sealed spaces. We set the box by the wall. A few seconds passed. Stillness. I didn't know whether to leave or pretend I needed something else. He walked over to the window and cracked it open. Cool air drifted in. The draft caught the corner of an old portrait propped against the wall. His father, my husband, framed in black. The photo was layered in dust, turned to face the wall. I had forgotten it was even there. Or maybe I'd chosen to forget. He stared at it for a long time. My throat tightened. He didn't say a word, but his silence said enough. Longing, questions, disappointment. I wanted to explain, to say I didn't know why I hadn't hung the photo, that maybe I was afraid of seeing that face every day, that after his death not remembering felt safer. But I didn't speak, because the explanation would have sounded like an excuse, and he hadn't asked for words. In that moment, I realized silence had become our only form of communication. We lived in a house full of subtle signals, where objects spoke louder than we did. I hadn't noticed when it happened. When real conversations turned into quiet avoidance. When, "How are you?" became a formality and not a question. He touched the frame. His fingers left a mark in the dust. I watched him do it and felt something shift inside me, like a lock sliding open. He was reaching for a connection with his father, but I hadn't been willing to be that bridge. I wasn't even willing to be the memory. I thought I was just filling space. But maybe to him I was more. Maybe he'd been waiting for me to be more. I turned away and started wiping down a shelf, trying to hide my face. Shame is a rare emotion when it comes not from others, but from looking at yourself. I felt ashamed that I had let grief harden into detachment, that I had become a function. Feed, ask, supervise. And he had become a shadow I circled around. We climbed down from the attic without a word. He went to his room. I stayed in the kitchen, stared at the cold stovetop like it was a screen I could rewind. Nothing dramatic had happened, but something between us shifted again. Not outward, inward. It happened on the hottest day of summer. The air felt like stretched plastic. Humidity clung to my skin like a second layer, and everything inside me felt overheated. Thoughts, breath, silence. I barely moved. Even the simplest effort felt too much. He didn't leave his room either. We were both waiting, in our own ways, for the heat to squeeze out the last of our patience. I stood at the stove, trying to cook something basic. Brother toast. A habit, nothing more. My hands moved automatically, but my mind was far. I wasn't thinking about the food. I was thinking about the attic, about how he'd looked at the portrait, about how I reacted, about how the space between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of tension, waiting, Questions no one asked aloud. I heard the bathroom door shut, but didn't think much of it. Then I turned, and he was there, standing next to me, a bottle of water in hand, his face still damp. He didn't say anything, just passed behind me. Our shoulders brushed. It was an ordinary touch, barely there. But something in me recoiled, not because he did anything wrong, but because I felt time stop. His skin was cool, mine burning. The contrast wasn't in temperature, it was in my response. I stepped aside. Quietly, without flinching, continued stirring the pot like nothing had happened. But inside, I locked up. Because that wasn't just contact. It was a signal. Soft, uncertain, but real. He left the kitchen, didn't linger, didn't look back. And I was left with a moment I couldn't undo. I realized this wasn't external danger. It was something internal. I was starting to feel too much, too sharply. Not toward him as my husband's son, but toward the way he looked at me. Like I wasn't just a guardian. Like I was someone he wanted to be seen by. Fully. Closely. That night, I couldn't sleep. The tension clung to my body like the heat. I kept replaying the touch in my mind, like a loop stuck on repeat. I got up, drank water, lay back down. Sleep didn't come, just waves of thought. I remembered my husband, his warmth, his simplicity, the clarity in his gaze, and it struck me. No one looks at me like that anymore. Except him. But not like a father, not like a son. There was caution in his eyes, pull, strength he didn't yet understand. And me? I wasn't sure I knew how not to respond anymore. That scared me. Not him. Me. The fact that I was losing grip. That I wasn't looking at him from a role anymore, but face to face. Not as a boy to guide, but a person who made me feel exposed. I found my old notebook. The one where I used to write the things I couldn't say out loud. On one page, reflections on guilt, on silence, on how pain morphs into detachment and detachment into confusion. I tore out those pages, burned them in the sink, just so they wouldn't remain. Not because they were shameful, but because I no longer knew whose side I was on. The adult who leads, or the woman who's quietly drowning. The rain started suddenly, without warning. The sky collapsed onto the earth like it had been holding back all summer. I stood by the window, watching the drops strike the glass, the street turning into a river. Everything felt cut off. The house, my thoughts, myself. Loneliness in weather like this feels physical, like a damp blanket you can't peel away. I heard the door slam. He'd come home drenched. His hair clung to his forehead, his clothes dark with water. His backpack dripped steadily onto the floor. I handed him a towel. He took it, quietly. Our hands brushed. This time, I didn't pull away. Maybe I should have. Maybe that was the last real chance to stop this. But I stayed. He dried his hair, then his shoulders. I stood beside him, watching the droplets fall from his skin. He looked up, and we both knew. He wasn't asking. He wasn't hesitating. He stepped forward and kissed me. Not like before. Not tentative. Not fleeting. He knew exactly what he was doing. And I knew too. We both understood. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. I felt everything tighten inside me. Not from fear. From clarity. There might not be a way back from this. The kiss lasted only seconds, but inside it lived everything we hadn't said. He pulled away first, his breathing uneven. He stood there, soaked, towel still in hand. I could see him searching my face. For reaction, for permission, for meaning. I didn't move, didn't look away. I just stood still. Then he left, quickly this time. Closed his door. I sat on a kitchen chair, still tasting the kiss. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't warm. It was honest. Stripped of anything pretty. It wasn't meant to happen. But it had. I covered my face with my hands. Not from shame. From overload. I was an adult. I knew the boundaries, but I also knew how easily they blur when you've been alone too long, when no one has touched you in years, seen you, asked how you're doing. When you stop being a person and start being logistics, a routine, a constant, a quiet system, then someone looks at you differently. And suddenly, you remember you have a body, a feeling, a presence. I don't excuse myself. I'm not justifying anything. I'm stating a fact, I answered. I didn't push him away. I didn't stay neutral. And in that, there's my pain, my fault, my fracture. That evening, I made tea. He didn't leave his room. I didn't call him. Silence grew between us again, but this time it was different. It didn't hold a question. It held a pause. And in that pause, an entire world. We both knew. From now on, nothing would be the same. Even if we never spoke another word. I don't remember when I wrote that letter. It was a draft. A few pages in a soft cover notebook. No date. No signature. I had written it on one of those evenings when everything inside got too loud to ignore, but there was no one to speak to. I just opened the notebook and started writing. It wasn't meant for anyone. It was an attempt to explain to myself why I felt the way I did. I tucked it between the pages of an old book. I hid it out of habit, somewhere no one would look. But he found it. I knew by the way he stood in the kitchen doorway. He didn't enter. He didn't speak. He just held the book. In his open hand, the same pages, crumpled, read. I didn't ask how or when. It was obvious. He had read everything. It wasn't about him. Not directly, but enough to understand. I had written about confusion, about how hard it is to hold a boundary when you stop feeling needed, about how loneliness doesn't scream. It drips, like a leaking faucet. Slowly, precisely, relentlessly. I wrote about being afraid of myself, about not recognizing my reflection, about how it sometimes feels like the house isn't empty, but I am invisible. How the warmth I feel near him scares me not because it's wrong, but because it's alive. And everything else in me feels dead. I wrote that I wanted to disappear. Not literally, just step aside, to give him space, give myself air, and a chance to make sense of it all before something broke completely. He said nothing. Neither did I. For the first time, I felt naked. Not physically, but through words. We didn't look at each other. He placed the book on the table and left. No gesture, no expression. Just silence so loud it made me dizzy. I sat there for a long time, rereading those pages. I don't think I'd ever seen myself from the outside. Never heard my voice without a filter, and it sounded tired. Lonely. Not dangerous. Not destructive. Just vulnerable. I wondered if I should speak. But how do you begin? I'm sorry would have felt hollow. You shouldn't have read that. Too late. It was just a draft. Didn't change the truth. The truth was I had left that letter in the house. Not locked away. Not hidden in a drawer. In a book. The kind of place where we both used to search for answers. That evening I didn't hear footsteps. Didn't sense him nearby. He didn't come for dinner. And I didn't call him. Not out of pride. Out of respect. We both knew we were standing on the edge, where every word could be one word too many. I went to bed early. No phone, no book. Just closed my eyes. And in my head echoed a phrase I hadn't written, but now finally understood. If you want to find yourself again, you have to admit that you're lost. I came back after 8 days. Not suddenly. No bags, no explanations. I just opened the door with my own key, like I'd done 1,000 times. The house met me with silence. Not cold, not hostile. More like waiting. It was clean, orderly. A washed mug on the kitchen counter. His sneakers lined up by the door. Everything said he'd been expecting me. Or hoping I'd return. I didn't look for him. Didn't go to his room. I walked to the bedroom, unpacked, changed clothes, and only then put the kettle on. Every movement felt slow, like I was relearning how to be in this space. Not as a woman, not as a stepmother, not as the center of someone's pain, just as a person. He didn't appear that day. I heard him moving around the house, opening windows, leaving, returning. We were living in different layers of the same home, and there was something right about that. After everything, giving each other silence wasn't neglect. It was space. Not absence, not rejection. A pause where both of us could think before either of us spoke again. For the first time all summer, I felt like the boundaries had returned. Clear, calm, not artificial. Not born of fear, but drawn with care. I no longer tried to interpret his movements. I didn't search for his eyes. I stopped asking silent questions. I simply let him be, and allowed myself to be near, but not inside. We began communicating through gestures, no words. He washed his own dishes. I left food in the fridge. He wiped his shoes at the door. I swept the hallway. It wasn't silent tension. It was mutual respect. New, careful, grown up. Sometimes I caught myself missing his voice. Those rare moments when he asked something, shared something. But then I reminded myself, this was the choice. Stepping back doesn't mean abandoning. It means not making things worse. I wrote in a journal. A little. Precisely. Without emotion, just facts. The day he stayed out later. The morning he turned on music. When he reheated soup. Small things. But in those details, I was relearning how to observe, not interfere. One morning, I saw him leave and hold the door open a few seconds longer than needed, as if waiting to see if I'd appear. I didn't. Not out of pride, but because I wasn't sure my presence would be kind. I didn't want to confuse care with closeness, or warmth with overstepping. He still lived with me, but not inside my world. And I was no longer inside his. We shared a space, not a life. I didn't know how long it would last, or how true that separation really was. But for now, it felt right. I no longer felt guilt, just caution, just responsibility for the air we now breathed separately. He came into the kitchen before I did. I heard the cabinet open, a plate being set down, the soft whistle of the kettle. Ordinary sounds, but something had changed in them. They were steady, calm, without hiding. I walked in quietly, not to surprise him, just not to disrupt the rhythm. He had already set the table. 2 pieces of toast, a cup of tea, an orange, peeled and carefully divided. Not done on autopilot, done with intention. He saw me but didn't speak, didn't turn away, didn't leave. He stayed. I walked over and sat down. He sat across from me. We ate in silence. No glances, no attempts at conversation. Just the clinking of dishes and the soft breeze from the half-open window. I could feel my breath evening out. The tension dissolving, as if this wasn't an apology but a way of saying, I understand. And I know you do too. It wasn't a gesture of reconciliation, not a scene. It was what remains when nothing else needs to be proven, when everything has already been said, wordlessly. I didn't look him in the eye. He didn't look at me. But I knew. We were side by side again. Not close. Not tangled. Just in the same rhythm. After breakfast, I cleared the table. He washed the mugs. Simple things. But their repetition brought peace. We weren't trying to restore what had been. We were building something else. Something quieter. Without pauses filled with expectation. Without words heavy with doubt. Sometimes pain doesn't leave. It just settles in the background. Living means learning how to breathe next to it. I don't know if he forgave me, or if I've forgiven myself. But I know we both chose not to destroy. That day, I spent hours replanting flowers on the balcony. He read in his room. That evening, we turned off our lights at the same time. The house went dark. But for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel scary.